So my system is called the 90% UBI. The idea is that um, everyone can have UBI, a relatively generous UBI. It was supposed to be set at $1,000 a month for every man, woman, and child, with the condition that 90% of the government is removed to pay for it.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay. I guess I guess the main question is in this like okay, so you would still so basically the idea is that you would still uphold taxes essentially because the government's paid via taxes, so you'd shrink the government spending on itself by like 90%, use that money to pay out everyone else. So you'd still have like a tax system, but you'd give it redistribute it amongst the people as opposed to use it in government social programs, right? Is that essentially what this is?
Yeah, so the social programs are essentially removed and replaced by this. The healthcare and education would be moved to the private sector and would be paid through this UBI. There'll still be taxes, but the thing is, we gather taxes and we distribute it in a way that's like equal to everyone. Everyone has the same opportunity in this sense, and yeah.
Okay, so well, I guess the first question is, what parts of the government would you keep? So, like, what is the 10% left? What is its like function? Is it purely to gather tax to do this, or is it like in any way, do you still have some police force or anything like that? Are there still like laws? Is this like purely well, I guess it wouldn't be purely anarchist, you're still collecting taxes, but
So yeah,
like how does that work? What is the faculty of the last 10%? I guess the main question.
So it will be a limited state in the sense that the function of the state will be mainly to protect individual rights and property rights. So essentially, police, court, army, prisons, and that's it.
Okay. Um.
Hello.
Oh, hello. Hey, Foxy.
Oh,
Um. Okay. I guess. I mean, to be honest, it's really hard to pick something like this apart because. So, just generally about me,
Wait, are you saying you like it? Are you saying you agree with it?
I don't know if I'd go as far as to say I like it. I guess. Here's like where I come from generally. I think as far as like economic models go, I think so. For example, I wouldn't really describe myself as like a capitalist or a communist, or a socialist, I guess you could say. I generally think that both systems more or less can work, and it's almost entirely down to execution. A lot of people come at economic systems from a more philosophical place. So they believe that, like, democracy, for example, is inherently a good thing and aligns with human nature. So more democracy in the workplace is something that's a good thing. That's something that like a socialist would argue. But I don't know if I necessarily like hardcore agree with that or believing that competition is like a purely good thing either. I'm more of like I don't know, I'm more of a kind of I tend to think it boils down more to execution than what you actually try and execute, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. So I feel like with something like this, it's so far outside. Like, I have no issue with this system inherently. I would almost just need to see how it plays out, really. Um, if it were to be implemented. I mean, the obvious things I could think of are so like the big criticism I have of like ANCAPs is it's what I brought up with last season name is like if climate change is such an issue as is while we have like relatively globalized, relatively communalized countries and we can't do anything against it. I don't see why an ANCAP society would be able to either. Surely it would actually make the problem worse because people would be individually chasing profits and not caring if they fuck over like another portion of the world because as long as the pollution doesn't hit them then it's kind of fine. And I feel like any time you shrink government you'll move into a more individual society, and I feel like problems like that are inevitably going to arise. So I guess how would you deal with something like climate change under this system?
So I would deal climate change in the same way your system will deal climate change. Your government has no influence over other governments that are polluting across the world. So in any which case, you need to take a more free market approach where you negotiate and agree for certain things. Now, that's in terms of the global level. In terms of the local level, if someone, there'll be more like an element of rights violations, and it will be more an element of tragedy of the commons. So the solution in free markets to tragedy of the commons, it's not regulation, it's privatization. So if you dump waste in my backyard, you violated my property rights and I can take you to court. Same with smog, same with things on the local level in this sense could be resolved through rights violations. On a global level, that's a different direction.
Okay, so I guess that's what I was going to say though. What would you do on like the global level? Because that's kind of the main issue. Like obviously, if someone's polluting literally in your back garden, then that does violate your property rights to some extent, right? Smog, I think, is a little harder. I don't know how exactly that would work. I would struggle to imagine that, like, I don't know, a group of people pollute the atmosphere and therefore they're violating the rights of everyone in that city. That seems a bit almost too abstract to really be, I don't know, like to really have any kind of consequence for, I guess.
Can I take it back? Can I take it back just a little bit?
Yeah, sure.
Why do you think that in a free market individualist society you'll have more pollution than a centrally controlled society?
So I don't necessarily think that you have more pollution, strictly speaking, but I do think you have less ability to counteract it.
Okay, so would you say that in societies that are largely command and control, you'd have almost no pollution or very little?
No, I don't think I would say that. It depends on the goals of
the Soviet Union.
Oh, sorry?
Have you seen the Soviet Union? It was centralized, like to the very brain of it. There was shite everywhere.
Yeah, I mean that. Yeah, that.
That's the thickest Scottish accent I've ever heard in my life.
Yeah, I gotta say.
Have you been on Trainspotting?
Oh,
sorry?
I was asking if you've been on Trainspotting, the movie.
What?
You don't know Trainspotting, the movie? Surely.
No.
Really? Oh, wow. Yeah, I mean, you should probably go. I mean, I should probably go watch it as well. It's like a classic movie about addiction, essentially. From what wait, that is the right film.
Well, it's in Scotland. Yeah. Okay. Never mind. Sorry. It's a bad. Apparently, a joke that didn't land very well. But yes, as Foxine was saying, it was very, very extremely polluted. There was no concern at all for the environment in any way, shape, or form. In Kazakhstan, the Aral Sea dried up. There was 70 years of pollution pumped into it. In, I think, Poland, there was the air was so thick it had all these pollutants that they had underground doctor offices in case just to avoid the pollutants in the air above the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And it was horrible. At the very least, if you have societies with property rights and
I kind of want to stop on that. As far as my grandpa told me, it wasn't that bad.
Sorry, which is not that bad?
The pollution in Poland. It was kind of shitty, but it's still better than Russia.
Sure. Russia itself, like there was, I remember inside Russia there was a river that lost all its fish. Like there was like a sea that had fish with caviar, and it was overfished and polluted. They lost every single one of its fish, as I recall.
Most of the pollution in Western Poland came from the border of the Germany, because they had far more industry than we did.
West Germany or East Germany?
West Germany, Eastern. Shut up! It's to the west from us. I know me directions, right?
No, it's fine. So I it seems to me, at the very least, from a principled point of view, Devin, that societies that have individual property rights, and potentially are richer, there's sort of kind of curve called the ecological Kuznets curve, where societies that start off they pollute more, and then there's like they hit a limit, and then they start caring about the environment more. The richer they become. So it seems to me in these societies, the pollution is less in general. Like there's a public consideration for the environment.
Yeah, I mean that makes. Yeah, I guess that makes some sense. I suppose if you did have a society set up in the way you're suggesting, whether it would pollute or not would boil down to the individuals. But I guess this is kind of what I'm saying. Like, so you can definitely point to examples of more socialized societies that did pollute a shit ton. I know the USSR has multiple essentially crimes against nature. So I'm not blind to that. Like they killed off a bunch of whales for seemingly no reason, stuff like that. But yeah, so I'm like I am aware of that, but I guess the issue is more of a I feel like it's more of a theoretical one because essentially if you if you have a more globalized I guess if you have a more globalized consciousness is probably the best way to put it. At some point, the fact that pollution is going to affect someone is going to come back to you, right? Like if everybody is looking out for everybody else's interests, if we take this to an extreme and say across the entire world, then at some point somebody is going to be affected by climate change, and then everybody will be kind of roped into helping everybody else, right? Whereas if you have a society of where there's a more individualized or a more individual philosophy, I guess, then I don't see how that could ever happen, basically. Because if the problem is so far away, then it's it doesn't matter essentially.
It's the basics of psychology. You basically have to break some stuff in order for people to notice and try to fix it.
Yeah, pretty much. If it's like if you offshore the problem, then it's not a problem, right?
Yeah, so I don't necessarily agree with it happening in reality. I can appreciate the theoretical situation. I would say that there's theoretically a few ways to handle it. One is what is economists like to say is the government of a particular country, because again, it's not global, it's for a particular country, says that we can calculate how much the emissions that a particular plant emits, and we can put a tax on it to make it to internalize the externality of those emissions, and as a result, the company then pays for those externalities. I think to a vast degree, I don't like this approach. And I don't think it holds. I don't think you can implement it in a way for a couple of reasons. Why you can't calculate it in any way, shape, or form. You can guesstimate it, but there's no way you can calculate it. Well, we've been the industrial era basically started 140 years ago, or let's say 200 years ago, and all the people that came before you, all the people up till now, you can measure exactly if you pollute how much damage that will cause. We don't even have an agreement on the models of how it will pan out, so it'll be very difficult to. It's practically impossible, and in the same way, like it will just never happen. Like the politicians themselves will never implement it because they have incentive to get reelected. And the reality of the situation is, if you tax, let's say, oil, fossil fuel production, or even just a factory, you're reducing production and you're reducing economic growth in the country. And politicians have never done that. In fact, they subsidize fossil fuels right now. So they talk about reducing our dependency on fossil fuels, and they're subsidizing it as we speak. They're not even taxing it, which will reduce it.
Yeah.
So I don't think this is practical. That's just one of the options. The other option is, and the last reason for the previous option that I forgot was, if you have such a tax, companies can just move their facilities to a country that doesn't have that tax. So, for example, they'll move it to China. China is currently 30% of all pollution comes from China, and they don't particularly mind. So you can move your facilities there, and you won't incur the tax, and just send it send it on ship to the original country.
Yeah, I understand that, but this is, still coming from a theoretical perspective, I guess, because so in practice, I can agree that a lot of it is not panned out how I would have imagined, I guess. We haven't seen these massive rise in kind of green energies, at least not as quickly as is seemingly necessary. But it is at least happening to some extent, I guess. And I suppose so what you've proposed is, I suppose, because you do have some limited government, you're like,
well, let me give the last two examples because it's relevant to what you're gonna, and then remind me to get upset about how Boris Johnson invested in all these wind farms, which resulted in a doubling of the gas prices later. You can remind me because we're in the same.
Hang on,
country.
what, really?
Well, yeah, the UK government invested a lot in the past in wind farms, and in 2021 there were very little wind throughout the year. We don't have solar. I mean, individuals have solar, but not like on a government.
Okay, I mean, I get this. I feel like this is something I should have probably heard. I guess
I'm sure you felt the gas price increase.
Yeah. But I thought that was more due to I thought that was more just a supply chain thing down to COVID more than anything else.
No. Well, the problem is when you have wind and solar, you have to have a backup, and that backup usually is natural gas.
Mm-hmm.
So because there was very little wind, the backup was natural gas, increasing the demand for it. And we were getting some from France. And if you remember, like 7 energy companies went bust in the UK because they couldn't guarantee they have like a guarantee for a year for particular gas prices. They couldn't commit to it, so they went bust. Right. And we got I think we got most of our gas from France, a little bit of our gas from Russia. This is in September of last year. And then all the way up to December. So yeah, I mean, the wind farm investment, because you need to pay for those plus the other backup plants, you pay double. And then there was a higher demand on natural gas. But anyway, sorry. You can research that.
I'd be curious to read about that.
Okay. So with regards to economies, the other way is not taxation, but emissions credit. I think this is a more practical solution where someone says you're allowed to emit this much in a year. And if you go under it, you can sell your credits to someone else. And if you go over it, you have to buy credits from someone else. So there's like an internal market, and there's still an incentive to reduce emissions. But I would give the following example as the most practical example. So the IPCC, for example, isn't a government body. It's like an independent body. And let's take the example of the ozone layer. So basically the ozone layer, if you recall, governments banned or tried to reduce the production of a particular chemical in hairspray, particular gas. And you can have the same thing in a free market, or instead of approaching governments, you approach direct, like the IPCC, for example, will just approach manufacturers directly and say, look, we're all in this together. We negotiate with everyone as a group and say everyone's doing it together, so no one's has a market advantage. And then they could, I think, relatively easily agree to something like that. With regards to fossil fuel, I think that's more challenging because it's basically it's connected to the growth of the economy and living standards and life expectancy, average life expectancy, all that kind of stuff. So it's more of a argument.
Like speaking energy per kilo.
Yeah, the more cheap, reliable energy you have, the more your society will flourish.
The only valid substitute for fossil fuels would be nuclear, because you can't produce enough windmills, you can't produce enough solar, and you have to replenish them in 10 to 15 years. They break.
Yeah.
So we either go nuke or we don't do anything.
And then we have all the environmentalists that don't like nuke, that protest, not in my backyard.
It's the cleanest energy possible. The
only
safest, is water.
Yeah, hydro would be good too. Yeah, but hydro isn't. Well, if you notice, whenever someone says green, they don't really mention hydro, although they should.
They should, yeah. It's good for both generation and energy storage. Like in the the pumps that you've got a storage down and storage up. When you get a surplus, you just pop up, and when you have a deficiency, just let the water flow through a generator.
Yeah.
The best kind of battery.
Also, the UK I think has geothermal, but I don't. It has the same as like the Nordic countries, but I don't. It's like a bit expensive. Anyway.
Yeah. So one of the things I'm interested in. So like I said, this is all, and this is an interesting idea. And I'd be very like I wouldn't necessarily. I'm not ideologically opposed to this or anything like that.
Okay.
Just to give you completely where I'm coming from.
You just have a few key points you want to hash out, but in general you like it.
I don't know if I'd go as far as to say I like it, but
yes,
it's
you
not...
like it. Come on, Devin.
I'll say I don't dislike it. I'll say that much. I guess so. One of the things I'd be interested in is like, so sorry, we said the government would have some small functions still. Would any of that be healthcare?
No.
No. Okay. So then I guess one question I have is, what do you do about healthcare solutions for incredibly niche illnesses or diseases that don't have a large market incentive to get solved?
Okay, so let me just take a step back for a second, and I'll answer your question specifically, just so I get like a full context. So I give a full context. Sorry. So in general, like I think with us, it's like if you convert it to pounds, it's like £770 per person, man, woman, and child from a certain age per month. To some degree, like that pays for certain things, and including medical care. I would expect that with medical care, or I expect with all of these functions that are in the markets, that prices go down over time, that the markets are essentially deflationary. The advances in productivity, advances in technology means prices go down and value goes up over time, that as a trend. Similar to medicine and pills and stuff like that. And I would assume that the majority of the population would be taken care of. And when I mean majority, I'm literally 99%. So there can be a situation where 1% or less has a particular niche that goes beyond that £770 a month, and they need more than that to do certain things or maybe even survive. So in that case, I would opt for free market solutions, as in charities, non-profits, social entrepreneurship, volunteering, things of that nature.
Okay.
But again, it's just for the remaining 1%.
Yeah, no, I understand this would affect like a very, very small number of people, but I still think, it's important to get to that, because I mean, I'd be so curious, but I should probably look into this, like how many people are affected by some form of disease is like incredibly niche and only affects a couple, maybe even like a couple thousand people.
Mm-hmm.
But all you need is like, I don't know, 20 of those, and then that's 20,000 people that are affected by a bunch of smaller kind of illnesses, right? And the only reason I would doubt that a free market solution would be able to solve for this, because it's just quite simply, I don't like. So with medicine, it's one of the most expensive. It's one of the most expensive areas to bring to bring in a drug to market costs so much money.
Mm-hmm. Do you know why?
Just down to development. So if there's only like an incredibly small percent of people that actually are affected by a certain illness or something, I don't see how you would ever get to solving this, because you would have, you can talk about, all the entrepreneurship and charity and all that kind of stuff, but ultimately then it would need to be like a huge amount of money essentially put towards developing certain things, and I just don't see how that could ever happen, I guess, under the system.
Okay, so let me push back a little. The NHS wouldn't cover someone who has a tiny or a small number of people that have a particular issue. They would just not be covered right now at all. If you have a very rare disease that needs very expensive medicine, good luck with our NHS.
I mean,
but let me. So this is a pushback on our system, but let's see how we solve it in general. This would be a pushback on our existing system, but let's see how we solve it in this system. So the reason why it's expensive to bring medicine to market is essentially or largely due to things like the FDA in the US. It takes, let's say for cancer drugs, it takes between 7 and 10 years to pass all the different hurdles to get your pill approved, get your medicine approved. And it can be shut down in any stage of the way. If it's if there's a lot of side effects, if there's a medium amount of side effects, if there's a small amount of side effects, if it's not effective enough, all these things can cancel the things of the new medicine. You don't have a situation where currently where you're allowed to release a particular drug and say there's a risk to this drug to particular people, and you should consult with your doctor if this is worth the risk for you. The FDA just says it has to be perfect in every way, shape, or form, or we're just canceling it. So in this system, you'd have more access to more options, and bringing medicine to market would be substantially, let's say, somewhat cheaper, because you still have the functions of the FDA just in the free market. And lastly, I would say this: if, let's say, 2,000 people in the UK are affected by this, and let's say it's a crippling disease, it's affecting the families of those people, and let's say, for argument's sake, that 2,000 of those families decide we're going to band together and we're going to contribute $1,000 a month. So 2,000 times 1,000. And if I'm not mistaken, that's 2 million a month. Let me just do a quick. I'm pretty sure that's 2 million a month to fund a particular research.
Yeah, I think it just cut out. Yeah.
Or is it the internet?
Oh, there we go. I can hear you.
Did I cut out?
I think. Yeah, I think you did.
Did I get to the 2 million part or not really?
No.
Oh. So I would say you have 2,000 families, and let's say this particular disease is very crippling to a particular person within those families, and those families say, we want to donate $1,000 a month for a particular to fund a particular research to deal with this disease, or find a solution for this disease, even if it makes the quality of life better or removes it 50%. That's still good. So that's $2 million a month to fund research for this very niche medicine.
Yeah, I mean that would still be. I mean, I'm sure you know as well as I do that that's probably that's going to be a wait. 2 million a month is like it costs like billions to bring them to market. I know you've said that,
right? But
in our current system, a large part of that is due to the FDA. I understand that, so it should be cheaper to bring it to market under your system. I understand.
Yep.
So I get that would I guess it would be down to me to research how much something like the FDA approval actually costs by pushing it back so much. I guess I would have to look into like the actual development costs of drugs on average.
You can look at it. I'll just say from my side, it's either hundreds of millions or up to 1 or 2 billion to pass all the hurdles. I mean, and when I say this, I'm not including the recent vaccines that went through like a speed booster to get it to the finish line. I'm talking about in general.
Okay. Well, I'm just curious. I mean, the range you gave was pretty big. You said it's hundreds of millions, possibly up to 1 or 2 billion. But I have to imagine it's lower than that, because according to this quick Google, the average cost, or I guess the median cost is what this study used. It's just a blurb on Google, but median cost of bringing a drug to market was just shy of $1 billion.
Okay.
And sorry, wait 1 minute. The median cost of bringing a new drug to market was 985 million, and the average cost was 1.3 billion.
Okay.
So I mean, I'd have to.
Oh, you're saying what part of it is the FDA and what part of that is? Well, I mean,
hang on.
Off the top of my head, I would say, the Pfizer vaccine we just got.
Yeah.
It was originally done by a German company called BioNTech.
Mm-hmm.
So you could technically ask how much did BioNTech invest and versus how much did Pfizer invest, and see what you come up with.
Yeah. I mean, like one of the this is probably slightly different. Clinical trials that support US that support US FDA approvals of a new drug have a median cost of 19 million. But I guess the FDA approval is the whole like thing is probably more than just clinical trials. Do you know if that's the case, or?
I don't know. I can't really comment on that.
Okay.
I just know in general.
Okay, I mean, fair enough. This is a point that I like. I just have to know the numbers to be able to agree or disagree. Really,
Sure.
like I just don't know.
That's
so I'd
fine.
have to get back to you on that one. Really, I guess like so. I mean, like I said, I don't hate this idea. One of the biggest problems I could foresee from it is almost one thing that's a bit too nebulous to really bring out as a super strong point, I suppose. But generally speaking, I think it's probably better to have societies where everybody is bought into, to some extent, into helping each other, I guess. But I suppose you could
You don't
argue
have
that
that now.
Sorry?
You don't have that now. You don't have a sense where people are contributing to society. You don't have charity. I mean, you do have some charities, but in the UK, you are taxed somewhat heavily. You don't get a sense of my taxes are going towards society. You're getting a sense of those bastards are taking money from me. But if, for example, you would not tax at all and say all your contributions to society are voluntary, then in that situation you will have a sense that you're contributing to something. But now we don't have that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I would. Sorry, go on.
Wouldn't it lead to the downfall of the society? Because
What
people would, like most of the people would just want to keep the money.
Also, in my opinion, I would say this. So, let's say you gave people twice as much as they have now, assuming tax takes half away for just for argument's sake.
That's still not a lot, man.
Well, okay, just it's still the case that only the top 20% of the people, the richest people, they bring in like 70 or something percent of all the taxes. Or in another way, the top 50% of the richest people pay 97% of the taxes. So it's not going to be everyone anyway. But let's say you give people twice as much money as they're making at the moment, meaning through income. Obviously, at some point they'll get satiated and say, okay, I have enough. I'm part of society. I have all I need. I have savings for my pension. I've got savings for my kids' university and all that. I would like to contribute to my local community and do certain things. And your volunteering isn't something that's money based, but people do it, and it does have a value that you can put on it. And you would reach that satiated phase faster through this. And in addition, and this is something we can discuss further, I would say that the government is incredibly inefficient at helping people, and charities would be far better.
Over in Britain really that bad?
Sorry?
Oh, you cut out, man. I was wondering if the internet is really that bad in the islands.
I'm on the mainland, so.
Oh.
Or at least
are you from then?
I'm in the UK. What region?
Say it's the islands for me.
Oh, the whole UK is an island. Well, fair enough.
Yeah, I mean the UK is an island. I'd call it an island.
Fair enough. Not the Isle of Man or the Isle of Wight, but okay, sure.
Yeah. I mean, sure. Yeah.
So I would say that
men in the Isle of Man.
Yes.
Go on.
I would say that the government is very inefficient at almost anything it does. Like very, very inefficient, throws money away. Obviously doesn't want to, but it just happens. Saying that to someone that worked for the government on 3 contracts, I have some experience with this. And I also have some studies. Or one study. And I would say that charities, the private sector, markets in general have more incentives and are better at efficiency to what they're supposed to do.
So this is something I would need to see like borne out in data, I guess, because I've heard the same complaint. I have a friend who worked in the government, in the public sector for a bit as well, and he had kind of similar stuff to say, I guess. So I wouldn't be that surprised. Like it's going to be true to some extent. I understand that, but I'd be curious to what extent, because I've worked a decent amount in the private sector. I've done like a variety of different jobs, and at least from my perspective, I know this is highly anecdotal, but from what I've seen, the private sector can also be incredibly like inefficient and wasteful at times as well. So this is something that I would need to see borne out in data, really.
Right. So the data says this. So I accept your point of view. And certainly larger companies can have top-down inefficiencies and bureaucracy and stuff like that. The government would have more. And at the very least, with the markets, at some point, it depends how profitable the large company is. At some point, the market is going to demand certain efficiencies, and then there will be the companies in the market will be forced to become more efficient or lose their market share. Or, a small company will disrupt them and take away market share and whatnot. The government, they don't have this incentive. They don't have an incentive to be efficient. Now, having said that, the UK at the very least have these they have these metrics that they self-impose sometimes to monitor if they're efficient or not. But I don't know to what degree they're followed. Certainly, in terms of you're losing money and stuff like that, that doesn't happen. I think just to open a new department in the government is £46 million, just to open one from nothing, and bringing the people and everything. And in general, it's very bureaucratic, and there's a variety of other reasons. But in general, as a rough number, if you're trying to help a particular, let's say you're trying to help poor people and you're trying to get money in their pocket. So from the money that's collected, this is more like US, I think, but I think it's also UK. But so from the tax money you collect and the money that arrives into the pockets of those people, 70% is lost to either government administration, bureaucracy, or suppliers of the government, and a variety of different things. I go through it a little bit in that thing I just posted in general.
Yeah. Okay, well, I mean, I'll have to. That's something I'll have to read about, I guess.
But we have in the UK. Correct me if I'm wrong, Devin. We have in the UK charities will tell you out of every pound how much pennies reach the end target, right?
Yeah.
So the government doesn't provide that.
Yeah, I mean that. Yeah, But I guess the thing is, though, is you can't exactly compare the government to a charity, right? Because I mean, a government has so many more functions. It's not just a case of essentially paying out universal credit, right? You've also got all the social spending and whatnot. So I understand that you could essentially.
I appreciate that, but the 70% I quoted doesn't include the police and stuff and other functions. Just specifically this.
Okay, so it just talks about social spending, basically. Well, but wait, hang on. So it doesn't include police.
No. The 70% figure is it money that's taxed for the purpose of helping welfare, for the purpose of helping the poor. From where it's taxed to how much money is in the pocket of the poor, 70% is gone.
Okay, but this is what I'm saying. Calculating that number seems quite difficult, which is why I need to see.
That's why it's valuable from the study.
Sure.
It's still a rough number, but it's not 69.3, but yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, you can already think of I'm sure you could think of a couple edge cases where it's okay, what about stuff just public infrastructure? Does that count? Yeah.
I mean, just if you are going to spend money on a big building for administrators to be in, that would count as money not arrived to the pockets of the poor. Sure.
Okay, but okay, fair enough. I guess this is kind of the issue and why I would be interested to see the methodology, I guess, because say for example, you pour money into a new building for administration, but this makes administration more efficient in the end. How I have no idea how that's factored in, right?
Again, to some degree, the idea is. So let's put it this way: when this is more. A lot of my data is American from this point. When Lyndon Johnson said, "I want to start a war on poverty. I want to American style, shock and awe, fight poverty, deal with it one time, and that's it."
Yeah.
So there was the intention of having a high amount of money up front to do the shock and awe element, but in addition, there was a big concern that this is how they sold it to the American people, that there shouldn't be a situation where the people become dependent on the government. So it's not the case that we're starting a number of services and we're going to continue them to infinity. We're going to do something now that will fix poverty, and then it will go down naturally on its own for whatever reason.
Sure,
and it didn't happen that way. Like the amount of money, the initial amount of money, which was intentionally high, stayed and grew over time, still growing, by the way. And people are being more dependent on the government. And that 70% figure, in a sense, is that if you would have been more efficient with the money, or if you hadn't bought that extra building, or you hadn't given it to your supplier, instead of giving it to your supplier, just directly give it to the poor, they would be less dependent on the government, and they'll carry on with their life quicker. So that 70% reflects that dependency on the government now, because it's not money that's given to you directly. You're depending on the government in a particular way.
Sure, yeah, I understand. I guess I would find I find that to be a bit of an okay. Is that so? The war on poverty is where the 70% figure is coming from, right? It's looking at that specific thing, like event as a case study, right?
Yeah, it's like 25 years after the war on poverty, or 20 or 30 years after the war on poverty. Someone did a study. So again, this is somewhat old. Someone did a study, and they say 70%, again, rough number, is not going to the pockets of people who need it, and it's staying either within the government or suppliers of the government, instead of just directly helping the poor. Sure,
I understand. I guess so. This is why I'd want to know more about it. I guess because just right off the bat, I almost feel like this is. Like, I almost wouldn't be surprised if this is more of a failure of philosophy in a way, as dumb as that may sound, because I feel like every single one of America's war on X has gone horrifically for a multitude of different reasons that isn't always just explained by government inefficiency. The most obvious example would be like the war on drugs is just a bad idea, I would argue, because it's just ill-conceived from the start. It's like such a bad approach to fixing that problem. So their approach to fix poverty, using the funds allotted to them, could have been a bad approach, in the same way that the war on drugs, just cracking down harder on crime and all that kind of stuff, is like, quote unquote, a bad approach, right? So I don't know if it's necessarily a great case study to extrapolate to all of governments and talk about inefficiency within them, right? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Would it then be a good approach to give those welfare services to something that has an incentive to be efficient?
What do you mean? Do you have a case study like that? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm just asking you from a philosophical point of view. So I'm saying, sorry, if you're saying that the approach was wrong, the philosophy was wrong, the implementation didn't work out, I'm saying that it could be the case that they didn't have the incentive to be efficient with the money and efficient with the end goals. So would it be the case that if they did have those economic term of incentive, if they did have those incentives, and they'd be closer to the ground, and they'll talk to the people, and they'll make sure to get the metrics right, that they'll do the reports saying, look, we're doing well, we're succeeding here and there, here we're not so succeeding, but we're going to try this, and then like someone else says, well, I can do it better than you, so shut down your operation and give me all your money, like in a sort of competitive way of fixing the problem. Do you think that would be better as a philosophical approach to solving the problem than what the war on poverty was?
Yeah, probably.
Well, that's the free market then.
So I don't see why that couldn't. I don't see but this is kind of what I'm saying though, right? So that's just an approach. It's not necessarily a free market approach strictly. There's no reason why a government couldn't do what you're suggesting, right?
There is a reason why the government couldn't do what I'm suggesting, yes.
What's the reason?
It needs to have an incentive. Currently, the government, when it runs out of money, it asks for more.
Okay, but surely... so the neo-lib answer, I guess, would be that the government incentive is because they want to get re-elected, right? If they run on a platform of addressing poverty, then if they do a bad job, they don't get in office, right? That would be the democratic answer, I suppose.
Well, there'll be some failings within that approach as well. So with the market approach, you'll have faster feedback. you don't have to wait 2 to 4 years or 2 to 5 years to get the feedback from the voting public with regards to how well they think you're doing.
Yeah.
In addition, it's a bit of a long answer, and I go into more detail in the link I sent. But basically, the idea with democracy or voting in particular, it's not the case that you need to necessarily influence everyone. You need to, in order to win, you need to have 50% plus one votes to win. And to some degree, you can game this this voting. You can do it in a particular way where you have a bunch of people that you know will vote for you, and a bunch of people you know won't vote for you no matter what. But somewhere in the middle, you can have there's people who can swing, and you'll target your approach on the people who can swing. And what you can do is you can target a number of interest groups and say these hold a lot of votes in a particular what do we have here? Particular town or city, and
yeah,
they are swing votes currently, and they can sway me either way. So I'm gonna give them some kind of sweet deal or benefit or something. I'm gonna approach the representatives of those interest groups, and I'm gonna give them something that they want so that they vote for me, and then I just kind of tip the elections towards me so that I win. And it's documented. It's something that happened.
Yeah, and I understand that. I guess, okay, let me just hang on. Let me just skip through a couple things because,
sure.
I mean, to be honest, the answer I even gave you, like I said, that would be like the neolib answer. It's not necessarily one that I like. That would be their answer to, where the incentive is and that kind of thing. But I wouldn't necessarily give that answer, strictly speaking. To be honest, when it comes to things like solving poverty, and like the war on drugs and all that kind of stuff, if anything, I would say the reason that, if anything, a lot of these failings are less down to kind of like free market versus government. I almost think, if anything, when trying to solve a problem like this, I would almost go for a more technocratic approach, where I just feel like ultimately some experts have to study it and try and come up with solutions. I don't think that, strictly speaking, a free market approach would. Maybe it would do slightly better than a centralized government. I don't know. But I honestly feel like it's because with a free market approach, I feel like a lot of people that would be assigned capital to solve these issues would have an incentive to solve it, but not necessarily the means to solve it. And I don't know what approach they could take that kind of would lead to a solution that isn't ultimately technocratic in some way. And because a private enterprise is going to get funding from a group of people, I don't see why you wouldn't have a lot of the same problems that you would have in a democratic one. So let me just make the comparison real quick. Basically, in a democratic society where you vote for your government officials, a bunch of people vote in somebody who sounds like they can fix poverty, but maybe have really bad solutions. In a free market system, I don't see how the same problem couldn't occur, where a company comes forward and is like, this is what we're going to do. And it may not be in reality a particularly good solution for the problem, but it sounds good and thus gets a lot of capital, directed towards it. I feel like ultimately what you would need is some kind of genuine expertise to solve the problem, some kind of technocracy, I guess. So yeah, I don't know. I just oh Jesus Christ, you're loud. Whoa. Yo,
Hello?
communist kid, keep your mic muted, man. You're loud as fuck, really shit. Yeah, but I guess, like, for me, I almost feel like you would have to take a more technocratic approach, basically. I don't necessarily think the free market would have a better time solving something like poverty. But what are your thoughts on that?
Well, let's take a more principled approach to look at this problem. So you have a situation where you have let's just compare between the two approaches. You have top down and bottom up, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
So let's say you have a top down, let's say, expert, or the government like brings in a bunch of experts. They say, we want you to solve the problem, and then they make like a sort of plan. That plan is tried to be implemented, and it goes X, Y, and Z. The bottom up approach would be you let many people in the market compete for the best solution or try to solve it in the best solution. They are closer to the ground in a sense. They're not doing it top down, they're doing it bottom up. and the one who is most successful at solving a particular problem, everyone else replicates that solution, or more funding is given to that particular individual company that is more successful than everyone else to solve a problem, and that's how typically things happen in the market. So far, did I exaggerate anything, or is that okay?
Oh, no, that seems reasonable, yeah.
So I would say the top-down typically doesn't really work. I mean, if you take like more hardline stance with, like, if you say, like, very top-down countries, like let's say the USSR or something like that, like, I know it's like a cliche example, but it didn't work in a particular way because the people who were at the top, they were very, very far away from the problem. The people implementing it down the chain, they kind of like followed the instructions blindly. They didn't really have like a say in a way, like, look, I have these instructions, but I see that in my particular case it doesn't work very well. Maybe I should change them. Obviously, they didn't have that opportunity. They had to follow exactly.
Yeah.
And it led to bad results. Now, obviously, I mentioned the incentives, so those apply here as well. I won't mention them again. But I think that the bottom-up approach typically is more successful. Just like on a case, like, let's say, evolutionary, like, you have many, many things trying it, and one of them succeeds, and then you give resources to the one succeed. Whereas the government one may or may not succeed, or at the very least, it will be difficult to get really down to the reality of the situation on the ground because you're so far away from it, so far removed, and it's you can just have like an abstract view of what's happening and general directions.
So I think there's a couple problems with this, though. So firstly, I would argue that the USSR it wasn't a technocratic approach, though. It was just I mean, like, every, in the USSR, you had essentially a ton of almost like regular people just running huge branches of government and stuff like that, right? You had like oh god, I can't remember. I remember recently, just ages ago. I forget what they're called, but you had kind of like individual groups running certain areas, right? You had like a committee almost, right?
Yeah, Soviets.
Yeah, so exactly, yeah. So yeah, none of those people were necessarily experts in a technocratic sense. They were just people that happened to be in positions of power, and so they would come up with a solution that they didn't necessarily know would work, and then just kind of like do it. And because it was a very authoritative regime, it would kind of be pushed onto the people regardless of what happened, right? I assume they did react to some things. I don't know a ton about the USSR, but it's still not a technocratic approach, which is kind of the point I was making, I guess.
So yes and no. Certainly in the agriculture, you have like committees who people who are former farmers and are familiar with it. I think to some degree, they may not have had as big as a say during the Lysenko period, or they may not have had a say if something ideological came from the top, but wasn't really connected to reality. Like that, the ideology itself wasn't connected to reality to begin with, but they had to follow it anyway. So that could have been the case. Sorry, Communist Kid. We're picking on Communist Kid now. We didn't even realize you're gonna come, to be honest. But I mean, with experts, you can have experts in the market as well. I mean, you can have an expert start a company and say, I know what I'm doing. I have experience in this. I can solve this problem relatively easily, and they would get that funding. And at the very least, let's probably agree here that if you had, like, let's say, a startup environment versus a large bureaucratic government, the startup environment, would react much, much more quickly to a particular problem, whereas the government, they meet once every 2 months to have a committee on a meeting on how to structure the next meeting that's going to happen in 2 months. They have meetings about meetings. But in that kind of general cliche sense, that's what I'm kind of trying to communicate, I suppose.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, fair enough. I can understand what you're saying for sure. I guess I just don't necessarily see. Yeah, no, I can understand what you're saying. I can pretty much imagine the response you'll have for each of my questions. So I guess I'll just move on to. There's one other thing I did think of that I feel like would be more of an issue. So because you mentioned earlier, basically. Oh god, one sec. I'm trying to remember what you said. Oh, okay. So you mentioned earlier about basically the best solution. The idea of the free market is that there's tons of competition, bunch of different companies open to solve a certain problem or introduce a certain product or whatever, and people fund the best one because they have a multitude of selection. They buy the one they like and then they roll with that, right? That's kind of like the idea behind it. But I guess one of the problems that I don't understand how you would get past either, I guess. And we're even seeing this today when we're supposed to have like anti-monopoly laws, but you can see where I'm going with this. Basically, I don't see how you would deal with monopolies. So in an ideal world, yeah, sure, competition would allow a bunch of different companies to compete with each other and the best solution would move forward. But in reality, I feel like there's still a lot of, first to market is a huge advantage. For example, like you can look at Twitch versus YouTube, for example. YouTube has objectively much better streaming infrastructure in terms of all of their capabilities. All your VODs are like saved and stored automatically on YouTube because they already have like huge servers and shit like that. But Twitch was first to market, so they have a bigger market share. And I feel like you can see this in a bunch of different areas. I mean, obviously, Betamax versus VHS is like one of the most infamous examples. So, and like right now, we have anti-monopoly laws, and they aren't really doing a ton. But I would be curious to know if, yeah, I don't know how a free market would solve for monopolies, I guess.
Okay, so I posted an animated clip in general.
Yeah.
To explain that. So, I mean, I can respect the first to market approach. Works sometimes doesn't. Google wasn't first to market, but they came up from something.
Yeah. I mean, there's obviously exceptions, like MySpace died out and lost to other. Yeah. There's obviously exceptions.
So technically, within a free market, it is very difficult to have a predatory or coercive monopoly. It is impossible. And then I'll explain what I mean when I added that word to the start of the monopoly. You can't. It's almost impossible or outright impossible to have a situation without the government intervening. Sorry, like as in a free market, where a monopoly raises prices indiscriminately, as in there's no one else to compete with it, and it raises prices indiscriminately. You either have a situation where there are other companies that compete with it, and there's pressure on that company to not raise prices indiscriminately. There's the fear of having a competitor in the future, and therefore they won't raise prices indiscriminately to not attract a lifetime competitor. And in addition, there could be a competing product, an alternative competing product, as in the area of what the product sells. There could be like it's not exactly the same, but it can serve the same function, and that could be external pressure on the company to not increase prices indiscriminately. In addition, if you have a situation where it's a monopoly, but it's a monopoly because it joined, or like a trust, sorry, as the antitrust you mentioned. So it could be like a group of companies join forces together to form like a sort of monopoly-like trust. There'll be internal pressures inside of it to break up, as in they all have to agree to abide by certain rules, and then at some point someone is going to break those rules, and then the whole thing is going to fall apart, like including cartels. It's the same effect. So there's external pressures not to be a predatory or coercive monopoly, and internal pressure.
Sorry, could you re-explain the internal one again? Sorry. So you said something about people would want to break the company up internally, essentially.
No, not the company up as in it's a single company. If it is the case that several companies join forces to become a trust, because you mentioned antitrust, that's what the trust was to begin with.
Oh, sure. Okay, yeah, sorry. Okay.
Or like a sort of cartel.
Okay, so why would they do that? Why would they decide to form a trust? Yeah.
To corner the market.
Oh, sure. Okay. Well, so I mean, I can't really speak too much to that part. But to the first part, my concern, I mean, realistically, as far as monopolies go, my concern wouldn't be, a company getting control of a certain corner of the market and jacking the prices up too high. my concern would actually kind of be the opposite, if anything. So if a monopoly developed in a certain industry, it would essentially just cut down the amount of. I feel like it would cut down the amount of choice people had because. So say a company gets so big that it's something like Amazon, right? They just have a ton of vertical integration. So everything in their supply line is incredibly efficient. I feel like once a company gets to this point, all their prices are going to be so much lower than everybody else's that they essentially snuff out all the other competition. And you'll just have that one company providing that one thing. And I guess maybe you could argue that company would provide, or in theory, that company could provide enough variety within its one niche that it wouldn't be an issue. But I almost feel like that would still go against the spirit of the free market in the first place, right? Where like no other company within that niche could compete, right?
So,
like, how would you solve for this?
So I'll try to give context into what you're asking me to solve. So in general, capitalism is pro-consumer, as in it's not pro-business. In fact, businesses today don't like the free market. That's why they try to go to government and get special regulations passed in their favor that affects their competition. In general, like businesses competing in a free market will actually have to compete for consumers, and that's, I don't know, they find it difficult or they don't like it. But in general, capitalism is pro-consumer. So in the sense where Amazon is giving a great deal to everyone and everyone's really happy, that's on the pro-consumer side, that's fine, in my opinion. Now, what I would say, I'll give a particular caveat to Amazon, and then I'll give another example for what you're asking. Amazon in particular spent 20 years investing in itself. So in 1996 it started, 97 it started. It wasn't making a profit till 2016. In the early noughties, Amazon, if you would have gone to university and taken computer science, and there would have been something about e-commerce, Amazon would have been given an example of what not to do as a failure, because they kept losing money and losing money and losing money. So this is a slightly different example because they were aggressively investing in itself for many, many, many years, not giving out any dividends to its shareholders and not, going the full mile. And now they're in a very enviable situation. You can see old talks by Jeff Bezos around that time, like late 90s, early 90s. He's basically a geek, like a typical, Java developer kind of geek.
Sure.
So that to one side. Now, if you have a situation where there's a company that has economies of scale, meaning they're offering something at a very, very reduced price, and it's difficult to compete with them because they have all this infrastructure now and machinery that is giving very good prices, but the choices are limited, because in order to get these economies of scale, you have a limited range, which is highly automated and highly productive, and you churn out these things at a good price. What you can do to compete is called economies of scope, where you have businesses, or like more niche businesses, that churn out different variants of the same thing. So let's take an example of sandwiches, right? You have sandwiches in the Boots are, when you go to Boots, there's like some sandwiches. When you go to Sainsbury's, there's like some sandwiches there, like triangles in a sandwich box, and they're very, very cheap. But there's only 3 or 5 of them, yeah.
Yeah.
But if you go to Subway has like this panel of different options, and you can potentially have like millions and millions of choices, right? You go in there, I want this, no, I don't want that, I want mixing them with this.
Yeah.
And that to some degree is also automated. Like, it's not that it's an inefficient process, but you can have if you calculate all the different varieties of sandwiches, it could be very, very high. Whereas, the sandwich boxes are just 3. So you can compete in economies of scope versus economies of scale. It would just be more expensive, but it would be tailored to your particular liking.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. Yeah, okay. I guess, that makes sense for something like sandwiches. I think it might be.
It can also work for cars.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So, to save money on cars, so all the different options you can have on cars, and seat warmers and colors and rims and all that kind of stuff is very difficult to implement, right?
Yeah.
So like if a company wants to save money, it will just give you like very few options. But if you're trying to if you're trying to attach a particular consumer that is interested in these customizations, and you're working in a particular way that it only takes 2 weeks to add the customization, and you have loyal customers as a result, then you structure in a particular way where it's a little bit more expensive, but you'll have it very quickly. You get the customization you want cheaper than if like a regular company just made the car and then like the dealership had to add it.
Sure. Okay. All right. Fair enough. Okay. I mean, that's pretty much everything.
In general, I hope that I'm giving you the concepts and the names of the concepts, and I'm not trying to bog you down with too much information. I'm just trying to present it as an overview.
I haven't gotten that at all. Sorry if I have been a little bit tired today. I was streaming like a puzzle game, so I was thinking for like a full 2.5 hours because it always tires me out.
Was it Baba?
Yeah, Baba is you. Yeah, brutal puzzle game, but yeah, no. So I've tried to engage with everything, and I'm not saying that I'm not trying to be like dismissive of anything you're saying or anything like that. I am just a little bit tired, so it's been a little bit tough to engage with points, but that's on me. That's completely fine.
To be honest,
but
I just wanted to say I keep looking at these ANCAP debates with the one you had, and no one else gets to the free market side. They always kind of stop on the what if my neighbor plays music too loud. And I've never ever seen a debate where they actually reach the free market side.
I feel like I've seen a decent couple that have, but the thing is because I almost feel like that's the most boring part of the debate to some extent because it's
the part I like the most.
Yeah, but I think I mean, you've had better answers than most people. But essentially, when I spoke to last username, I was like, okay, well, what about this problem? And his solution to everything, or his answer to everything, was essentially that I just believe the free market would do it better than what we have now. That was basically all he had to say, really.
Mm-hmm.
And so, whenever he answers that, it's not really a ton of stuff to talk about, really, I guess. I guess here's where I'm coming from, right? Like I said at the start, ultimately, I don't necessarily hate your suggestion. I think it's a lot more reasonable than like a pure ANCAP society.
Okay.
But it's just one of those things where I almost feel like it's so I guess here's the thing, right? So okay, say you have like a company and have you ever worked in like the private sector? I know you said you had government jobs, but
yeah.
Have you worked in yeah? Okay, so you probably know this. I'm assuming you've worked at like a couple decent sized companies, right?
Mm-hmm.
So generally speaking, if you join like a decent sized company, they're going to have a absolute fuck ton of bureaucracy and rules and just lots and lots of random shit you have to learn. Or at least this has been the case from my perspective. And and it was definitely the case when I worked at Chevron. I did IT like desktop support there basically. So they're like one of the biggest oil companies in the world. Whole bunch of just random shit you have to do and processes and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of the time, the reason why it gets to this point is because you have a small company initially, and then run into certain issues, and then you put rules in place to alleviate those issues, and it just sort of grows and grows and grows and becomes more and more complex. And by the end, you realize that a bunch of this stuff is kind of inefficient, but a lot of it's in place for some good reason. And I kind of feel like society is almost a little bit like that to some extent as well. So my almost issue, and it's not like a direct criticism, it's a bit of a weird one, but like my almost issue with something like this is it almost seems like it would be too simple to account for all of the complexities of modern society. And I feel like as a result, there would be a ton of stuff that just isn't ended up being accounted for. And when a lot of these solutions is kind of, well, I just think that the free market would solve for these things, I don't know, I find it difficult to believe that it necessarily would, I guess. And like I said, I don't hate this idea or anything like that. I'm just kind of like, I don't know, I'm middling on it. I'd be curious to see how it plays out for sure. But that's kind of, that would be one of my major reservations. I feel like, yeah, it's just when you have a solution that's as seemingly simple as this, I almost feel like it would have to have missed a ton of complexities within society, I guess.
So Okay, I understand what you're saying. I'm going to give you a little bit of a last username answer, but I'll also back it up a little bit.
Sure. Okay. Go on.
So I understand your concern, and I would say that obviously within the business management school of studying, like bureaucracy and like when companies become too top heavy and stuff like that, it does slow down the company. Especially in the case of IT. I'm not saying Chevron specifically, but in the case of IT, though, they are trying to make like a more flatter management structure to resolve complexity, because just communication it becomes like a limiting issue. Like you can wait 2 weeks for someone to send you back an email, and you're waiting and stuff like that. So it is a concern, and obviously like these kinds of situations are more ripe for startups to disrupt. And I would, if you haven't been in one, I would highly recommend, just for your own, how can I say, sense of being and spiritual benefit, just to go to work for one for a little bit, because it's a very different experience. It's very exciting typically. And I do enjoy, and I do try to go to work for those. Usually I go for more mature startups, and they pay quite well. Than just like the 5-man in a basement or something like that.
Sure, yeah.
But obviously, like there are ways of addressing it. I know, for example, Amazon tries to have what's called 2 pizza teams, where they have these teams where if it takes more than 2 pizzas to feed the team, then the team is too big. Although that's the thing. I'm not entirely sure if they don't have a lot of technical debt. I think they do. So I'm not sure exactly how they did, but they do have like that startup approach, no matter how big you are. And some companies, like I work for companies with like thousands of people, they're trying to do something similar in their philosophy. So that's the one side. With regards to complicated problems, I do feel like the bottom-up approach or the market would solve it better. There's just like a larger number of people there. They have an incentive to solve it, assuming there's like something profitable from it, or if they're a social entrepreneur, then helping society in a particular way. There's an incentive to start it, and people will try a variety of different things. They'll fail, they'll pivot, they'll fail, they'll try something else. Someone else will come and do it better. At some point, I just feel like, just from an evolutionary point of view, the market will react better than the government. Now, I would say that my particular approach, barring the UBI, has existed in the past, and that would be the US between the years of 1863 and 1913. So that period of 50 years is very much, or is the closest possible to what I'm advocating for.
Okay.
It didn't have taxes, or they had high tariffs instead. They didn't have income taxes, sorry. They had high tariffs instead. And maybe
No, I understand what you're saying in general, yeah.
And in that particular time, in terms of innovations and inventions and innovations, it was extremely prosperous time. Now, bear in mind, when the US started in 1776 or 1780, 1790, they were essentially an agrarian community. They were about the same GDP as Brazil at the time.
Right, okay.
And then they just shot up in terms of all their innovations and inventions. They had like a variety of very well structured property rights and intellectual property rights. But through this period, through this century and through this half century, a lot of innovations happen. That's something particular that I'm interested in. So just as an example, earlier in that century, they had the mechanical reaper, so people could, still reap the harvest, but not as many people needed to work in agriculture. Therefore, they moved to the cities. In that particular period, that we had the telephone, the telegraph, trains were already like 30 years earlier. Ford started making cars, so you moved from horseback to cars. Then all of a sudden they thought, oh, what's this black bubbling thing coming out of the ground? It's oil, and every time we're looking for water, it ruins the water. We don't really like it, but now that Ford made his engine, this is kind of useful and helpful. And then we had like more machinery, we had more steel. You started seeing skyscrapers around that time. A huge amount of innovations happened in a relatively short period of time, to solve particular problems, when you let people be free, or in a way you can say the government protects people's rights, the government lets people be free, and free people produce.
Sure. Okay. I mean, fair enough. Okay. I'll be curious to look. What was that time period you gave in the US?
It was 1863, just after the Civil War, to 1913, before the central bank came.
Okay, cool. I will look into that for sure. Okay, fair enough. I mean, yeah, I don't really have much of anything else to say. It's been a pretty interesting discussion for sure. I'll definitely.
Are you excited? Is there hope for the future now?
Maybe. I mean, hey, I don't know what I can do to push it if you completely sell me on this, but I guess we'll see.
Anyone else have any questions?
You have biscuits.
There will be biscuit. There will not be any shortage of food. Capitalism has more of a problem with obesity than starvation. Don't worry.
On a biscuit.
You'll have a whole tin.
Oh god. Yeah, I'll have a little look through some of the resources you posted. I'll do a little research. If I've got any more things to bring up or any more issues, I'll message you back and we can hash it out. Oh god, I was gonna ask one other thing. I can't remember. Yeah, no, I think that's pretty much everything, to be honest. Yeah, cheers for the chat.
Okay, thank you.
All right, peace out.
Bye.
Bye.